Hello everyone, it is nearly the end of 2021 and I thought that as is quite popular at this time of year, I'd do a bit of a look ahead at 2022, make a few predictions, do a little bit of lessons learnt from what has happened in 2021 in regards to Brexit. So this will probably be my final video of the year and I shall wish everyone a happy new year and yeah, let's see what my make of 2022 and what Brexit holds in store for the UK. So, one of the things I teach anybody when they're doing negotiations is that any failures in negotiation, in preparation, will usually become evident within a year or two of concluding your negotiations. So I don't think Brexit is any exception to that rule. In fact, I think Brexit provides a very good example of all these sorts of failures and how this sort of thing can come back to bite you. So, and that is typical for any big sort of negotiation that anyone does. Brexit is more high profile, more visible, and probably, let's just be honest, has far more failures to draw upon. So I have lots of material to talk about. I'm going to have to be a bit selective if I don't want to go on forever. So hindsight is a great thing in negotiation. Actually, it's an important thing for any negotiator to look back at what you did and to think what you could have done better and to apply some fairly serious critical analysis and self-critical analysis to think about, what did you get wrong? What can you do better next time? Now, Brexit should be no exception in this regard. I don't think we'll have it. I'll probably be one of the few people that does this sort of thing, and this is routine for me. This is what any professional negotiator would do, would look into it. Now, in terms of Brexit, there are considerable political and economic effects that result from it. We've seen a lot of political upheaval, but that's difficult to separate out from the political leadership. The political leadership itself has created a lot of the upheaval, so it's almost quite difficult to say, well, that's specific to Brexit or that's specific to political leadership or instability, or lack of leadership, I should say. But one thing I did want to point out on the economic cycle side of things, and this is a bit of a truth that politicians and journalists and so on don't really want to admit, which is that any good economic policy that any government brings in, you will rarely see the benefits of those policies for at least 2 years. That is just because they take time to take effect and to make a measurable impact. However, any really bad policies that cause destruction to your economy or adverse effects can take 2 years to come into force, but can also have more immediate effects. So perhaps an interesting illustration of this is Trump when he was president. Was boasting that he was driving forward lots of employment and economic benefits and so on. The harsh truth is that for the first 2 years of his presidency, a lot of those benefits would have actually been the byproduct of the Obama presidency and whatever policies he had implemented as those effects kicked in. So around about the time when you would have seen the benefits of any Trump policies, COVID hit. And what we did see was a significant downturn as a result of COVID. Maybe that would have been a result of Trump policies as well. We won't ever really know. You can't split out the two. So there's been a lot of COVID masking effects, certainly on the US side of things. It's very hard to point to the Trump legacy and say that he caused failure or he caused success, because COVID overshadowed all of it. You can't prove it one way or another, although of course plenty of people will have their opinions. And likewise in the UK, we have now 1 year having left the EU, having left the single market, and the economy is in significant turmoil. But how much of that can you split out as directly related to COVID and how much is directly related to Brexit? It's quite difficult to make a clear argument. Of course, there are various bits of data that people can draw on, and everyone, of course, will have an opinion. Certainly, the economists have drawn some very stark data about GDP growth and the huge reduction in the UK's trade figures or export, deficit scenario. So we can look at that as perhaps some signs of the damage that Brexit is causing to the UK economy. But truthfully, that would become more obvious in the 2-year, 3-year point. So 2022 may well be, and 2023 certainly will be, where more of the effects of the policies implemented this year will really start to be seen, the impacts. So if there is to be any recovery from this position, it's going to require some really significant self-critical analysis by the politicians, by the leadership, in order to turn things around. And that is absolutely the same in any negotiation. If you negotiated something you've realised you got it badly wrong, you really need to drill right down into all the facts and figures. What data have you got that proves what has happened, and what do you need to do to correct it? So that is pretty much the position that Brexit is in right now. So with that in mind, let's take a little bit of a thought piece into what are the problems, immediate problems facing Brexit that needs to be tackled. Because regardless of anyone's opinions on Brexit, whether you thought it was an absolutely terrible idea to start with, whether you were a supporter and perhaps are getting disillusioned with it now, the truth of the matter is everyone's in the same boat. And you don't really want to suffer, regardless of whether you thought this was a bad idea. You kind of want things to get turned around. But the reality is there are significant problems that do need to be addressed. So we all got an obvious one of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, this should be easy enough to address. The EU have made a load of proposals. There's a lot of support for those proposals in Northern Ireland. However, the UK government is stringing this out quite a bit, probably for political purposes. So what are the consequences of that? Well, best case is just lots of noise, but things eventually get agreed and signed and settled down. That's the best case scenario. Possibly more likely scenario is more instability, possibly even a little bit more violence in Northern Ireland before finally UK government will reach an agreement with the EU, perhaps begrudgingly. And worst case scenario, things really go very bad in Northern Ireland. But having said that, I don't judge that personally too likely, because economically speaking, Northern Ireland is actually doing quite well. So I think the better case, middle case scenario, hopefully, will be more likely to result. But there will be lots of noise, lots of disgruntlement from the Brexit side of things who want to use this as a political football to try and drive forward their case, drive forward their objectives. Another big problem that the Brexiteers will have to fix in 2022 are the trade agreements. The deeply flawed trade agreements already agreed, and the lack of any decent trade agreement going forward. UK exports figures are absolutely shockingly awful at this point in time, not widely reported in the mainstream media, but UK exports had really massively dropped, I think somewhere between at least 10 and 20%. So that needs to be remedied as a matter of urgency. Certainly the Brexiteers will know that. So they will try and agree yet even more trade agreements at high speed, regardless of quality, when really what they should be doing, of course, is focusing on improving trade agreements, including with the EU single market. I suspect that won't happen, unfortunately, for ideological reasons, but those are what is required to tackle those problems. Another issue, and it's not particularly sexy, regulatory frameworks and standards, but this is critical. This is linked to all the other issues. You've got to have a set of standards and rules that everyone understands, can work with, and doesn't cause too much disruption. That doesn't just mean laws and regulations, although those are essential as well. It also means infrastructure. So, for example, port infrastructure or customs infrastructure to process imports and exports efficiently. All of that is hugely deficient at the moment, and again, something that Brexiteers will have to, or any leadership really, will have to rapidly address in order to curtail some of the Brexit problems that we've seen in 2021 and only due to get worse. An easy solution, to be honest, is just to mimic EU standards. Then everyone understands what it is you have to operate towards, and then you would make changes gradually and incrementally. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the strategy in 2021. I suspect that will not be the strategy going forward in 2022, which basically means it will create even more problems, even more uncertainty, even more headaches for anyone involved in import or export of goods and services, which will again cause more economic harm to the UK. And this leads to the final point of the immediate problem for Brexiteers, definitely its lack of buy-in, lack of support and reducing confidence. Certainly those who didn't vote for Brexit feel very justified in saying this has been an absolute nightmare. Those who did vote for Brexit and did believe in it are showing widespread and increasing disillusionment with Brexit, and that's been reported in various areas, and that's going to be a significant concern for those pushing forward Brexit. If you don't have that widespread support, that's going to cost you politically. It's also going to cost you in your ability to get anything done. So that will be a matter of priority for the Brexiteers. I would like to say you should solve that sort of problem by taking concrete and effective action. In reality, again, I suspect this will be done through more propaganda means, shall we say, of trying to pretend that things have been fixed by spinning the messages, by using the media to promote positive news stories, but not by actually doing concrete things that fix the problems. So these are what I see as the immediate problems in Brexit. However, of course, there are considerable wider problems, and this could be a very long list indeed. We all know the issues about fishery and farming. These are industries facing massive challenges and massive prospect of decline and destruction as a result of things like the bad trade agreement, the poor regulatory environment, the inability to export or import, and so on and so forth. So those will become major political issues not addressed, as well as actually economic issues. It's not just for those involved in those industries, even for the UK as a whole. You don't really want these industries to take such a massive hit that has all sorts of other consequences. The workforce shortages has been acute. Will they fix that in 2022? They definitely need to. Whether they will is a bit of an open question. There's no denying the fact that immigration policies have been extremely harmful to the ability, to creating this workforce shortage, but also just the atmosphere, a very hostile atmosphere that doesn't encourage people to come to the UK and to work, promoted by hostile media messaging. That also is not going to help to improve the situation. All of that needs to change because without a workforce, you can't really create economic growth. Simple as that, really. Linked to workforce, linked to regulatory, linked to trade agreements, linked to all sorts of things, really. Supply chain shortages. So now some of this is linked to wider global issues, but I think anyone with even a vague sense of critical analysis will not find it too difficult to identify that Brexit has caused considerable supply chain shortages, whether that's from not having enough capacity at ports, whether it's not having regulatory frameworks in place so that paperwork can be filled in quickly and efficiently and goods, processed effectively. All of that has been massively lacking. So, and this is causing various issues across all sectors. And this is one of the really surprising things about Brexit, actually, is people might have predicted that certain sectors would be adversely impacted, but the actual reality is just about almost every single sector has been adversely impacted. It's quite astonishing, really. Possibly the only sector that had been positively impacted would be those who specialise in processing import and export paperwork, I suppose. So obviously they're having bumpy years, but everyone else is likely to have a rather bad time. This actually includes the UK services sector. And this is crucial, actually, because the UK services sector was the big money spinner for the UK. And I think the impact of the failure to cover this by the Brexiteers when it comes to trade agreements or when it comes to regulatory framework are really going to hit home in 2022, whether that be increased loss in jobs, loss of opportunities, movement of people, offices, business basically to other capitals and other countries, particularly in Europe. That is going to become more obvious probably in 2022. We're also going to see declining manufacturing competitiveness. And bizarrely, when economies tend to get impacted, that adversely, that usually makes manufacturing more competitive because things get cheaper. But in the case of the UK, because of the increased barriers to trade, everything that UK manufacturing needs will get more expensive to obtain, which makes it harder for them to compete, makes it harder for them to export. So that is going to be, that's going to come through for the next couple of years, I'd say. Perhaps even more concerning from a political perspective is decreased purchasing power. Now, some of this is linked to inflation and declining wages, but actually Brexit itself is just making people poorer, making the whole UK economy poorer. And that is going to hit them in the pocket, and that's going to exacerbate all the other problems. People are going to buy less goods, less services, they're going to do less shopping, they're going to hoard more money, for example, which, in certain contexts is a good thing to do, but actually from a wider macroeconomic perspective, it's going to cause even more harm on top of what it is that Brexit is causing. So this links back to my earlier point about more buy-in and reducing confidence. People will, vote with their wallets, essentially, as a result of what they see Brexit is doing, which will increase the harm, paradoxically enough. So, that is just more worrying than everything else, because that can lead to quite considerable political instability. And I mean that in a bad way, in the sort of having riot type sense. So possibly not there, possibly not a significant concern for 2022, but definitely this is one of the things that's building up to it. We will also see a decline in UK global influence. Brexit has harmed the UK's international standing quite considerably. And this will also lead to even more democratic instability, due to everything I've summarised. In fact, I pretty much could have just summarised this whole section by just saying everything. Everything touched by Brexit had been bad news. And not least of all of that is the UK's political process. That has been shown to be massively deficient, massively woeful, massively bad at reacting to events, and also quite corrupt, quite a significant loss of legitimacy, and that will be felt domestically and internationally. So I think, again, it doesn't really matter which side of the fence you fall on when it comes to voting for or against Brexit. These are things that are just deeply concerning. The whole consequence of Brexit is just looking awful, and the fact that it will cause all the problems doesn't necessarily give anyone any cause for optimism. So what are my predictions really for 2022? Well, there's a huge number of problems, I think, is the honest reality. And you need to sit down and tackle one by one. That's what any leadership would need to do. That's what any negotiator in charge of the process would need to do. But when you've got this many problems, you've got a bit of a sensory overload issue. And I think that's going to be the issue, is that you're going to have UK leadership lurching from crisis to crisis, trying to tackle all the problems and basically not fixing any of them really, or very few of them, because there's just so many. So, I fear 2022 is not going to look much nicer than 2021, although we can at least hope that the coronavirus situation might start to improve. I think there's definitely a need for significant changes in direction in terms of policy. I think there will be some here and there, bits and pieces. I think it will be ad hoc. I don't think it will be strategically thought through and coordinated. So will it be backed by hard-nosed assessment, in order to make them effective? I suspect, and I'd love to be proved wrong here, but I suspect that ideology and politics will continue to dominate and continue to frustrate any actual genuine effort to tackle the problems. And again, like I said, it doesn't matter which side of the fence you fall on in Brexit. It's not something you want to see in any political leadership, that they're so attached to ideology that they just cannot get themselves out of it. They cannot see the problems, properly and develop effective strategies to deal with them. And this is a learning lesson for any negotiator. And this is why I always tell people to ask the question, what is it you're trying to achieve? What are your clear objectives? Because it's very easy to get lost in things, especially when you're doing firefighting. And too wrapped up in the positions that you've established for yourself. So if I was to treat this as a negotiation position, I would take all those problems I have listed and I would develop action plans for each and every one that really are based as much as possible on fact and figures, and understanding what assumptions need to be made in order to make progress against each of those issues. Sadly, I think UK politics as it currently is not geared towards doing that, and thus they simply won't fix the problems, and that will continue to expose the deep fault lines running through UK politics. So there's my somewhat not particularly optimistic predictions for 2022, so my apologies for that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope things can turn around, because all these negative effects are not things I want to see, not things I want to experience. I'm sure many people would feel the same way. But we shall see what 2022 has to bring. So in the meantime, I will wish everyone a happy new year. I will hope you can at least celebrate as much as you can in this COVID situation, and that you plan ahead and prepare well for next year. Establish yourself to be in a solid position to ride out the storm that may be coming. And have a good time, and we shall see you in New Year.